Before everything fell apart, our life was small, but it was good. There was a rhythm to our days, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. The morning light would spill through our kitchen window, landing right on the corner of the table where Eli liked to sit. He always said that spot made the coffee taste better, like the sun had its own secret recipe for warmth. I'd make us breakfast, eggs and toast, sometimes pancakes if we weren't rushing. We didn't have much, but there was peace in the way we shared things. The same old mugs, the same creaky floorboards, the same half-broken radio humming country songs from the 80s. Eli was a dreamer, the kind of man who talked with his hands. He could turn an idea into a plan in seconds, and his confidence was contagious. When I met him, he was already building his own small business, a local contracting company. I remember thinking, here's a man who's building something, not just for himself, but for the life he wants to share. And when he looked at me, it wasn't the kind of look that makes you blush. It was steadier, deeper, like he saw the quiet parts of me no one else had ever noticed. We fell in love fast, not like a storm, more like sunrise. Slow, certain, inevitable. Our first apartment had peeling wallpaper and pipes that rattled every time you turned on the shower, but we loved it anyway. On rainy nights, we'd lie on the floor, listening to the water drip through the ceiling into a pot. He'd joke that someday we'd have a house so solid the rain wouldn't dare to fall on it. We got married 2 years later. Nothing fancy, just a small backyard ceremony at my aunt's place, with fairy lights strung between 2 oak trees and a cheap speaker playing You Are the Reason. When he said his vows, his voice cracked. He said, "Claire, I don't promise you a perfect life. I promise you a full one." And for a long time, he kept that promise. We had slow weekends, road trips with no destinations, quiet laughter in grocery store aisles. He built things. I wrote lists and planned budgets. We balanced each other like 2 halves that didn't always fit, but still found a way to hold together. Then came the business growth, the first contract that really changed things. I still remember the day he came home waving a piece of paper, shouting, "Claire, they said yes, the city deal's ours." He lifted me off the ground and spun me around until I couldn't stop laughing. It was the happiest I'd ever seen him, and in that moment, I thought, we made it. We bought a modest house on the edge of town, 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a porch swing. Eli would come home late but full of stories, new clients, new deals, new dreams. And I'd listen, smiling, half proud, half worried, because every time he said just one more job, it came with another long night, another missed dinner. But I didn't say much. That's what love does sometimes. It makes you quiet when you should speak. I told myself he was doing it for us, and maybe he was. Still, sometimes when I'd lie awake waiting for him, the silence would whisper things I didn't want to hear. We started losing pieces of each other without even noticing. He became busier, I became lonelier. We stopped laughing at small things, stopped holding hands in public, stopped dancing in the kitchen like we used to. There was one night I'll never forget. He came home exhausted, his shirt stained with sawdust and sweat. He sat at the table and just stared into space. I brought him a plate of food, but he didn't touch it. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "Nothing, just work." But his voice had lost its spark. The same voice that used to tell me about dreams and skylines now sounded like it was dragging through gravel. I wanted to reach out, but something in his eyes stopped me. Pride. Fear. Maybe both. That's the thing about distance. It doesn't always come from fights. Sometimes it's just the slow, invisible fading between two people still sitting side by side. We had one last good night before everything changed. It was summer. The air smelled like lilacs and wet pavement. We drove out to the lake after dinner, no plans, just the two of us and a bottle of cheap wine. We sat on the dock watching the water shimmer under the moonlight. He held my hand and said, "Whatever happens, Claire, promise me we'll never forget this. Just this feeling." I smiled and said, "What feeling?" He looked at me for a long time before whispering, "The feeling that we're okay." And that's when I realized, even before the fall, he was already afraid of it. Looking back, I think the quiet before the storm is the hardest part of any story, because it tricks you, makes you believe you've built something unshakable. You start to mistake routine for safety and love for immunity. But storms don't ask for permission. They just arrive. And ours was already brewing on the horizon, quietly, mercilessly, beautifully disguised as success. It didn't happen all at once. You never notice the cracks until they're everywhere. In the walls, in your words, in the way someone stops looking you in the eye. Eli's business started slipping a few months before he told me. At first, I thought he was just tired. He'd stopped talking about work, about plans, about anything that looked beyond tomorrow. He'd come home and sit on the couch, staring at nothing, the blue light from the TV flickering over his face. I'd ask, "Rough day?" He'd answer, "It's fine." But his eyes, they looked like they'd seen something they couldn't unsee. The night he told me the truth, it was raining again. I remember the sound, that steady rhythm against the roof, like a ticking clock marking the end of something we hadn't realized was ending. He was standing by the window, still in his work clothes, his shoulders slumped. "Claire?" he said quietly. "We're in trouble." I turned off the stove. "What do you mean?" He didn't look at me when he said it. "The bank's coming after the house. I tried to fix it before telling you, but..." He took a deep breath, like the air itself was heavy. I might lose everything. I remember just standing there, spoon in hand, not moving. Like if I didn't react, it wouldn't be real. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded small, almost childlike. "How bad?" He turned to me then, and that's when I saw the shame in his face. Not anger, not fear. Shame. "The bank's coming after the house," he said. "I tried to fix it before telling you, but..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. That night, we sat at the kitchen table for hours, not speaking much. The bills, the notices, the numbers, they were spread out between us like pieces of a life that didn't fit together anymore. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him he should have trusted me sooner. But when I looked at him, at the way his hands trembled slightly as he held a pen pretending to calculate something he already knew was impossible, all I felt was heartbreak. Because he wasn't the man who failed. He was the man who tried too hard to hold the world together with his bare hands.
The next weeks were a blur. He sold his truck, closed the office, returned calls from angry clients, and I tried to keep us afloat, cutting corners, selling furniture, baking bread because it was cheaper than buying it. He started sleeping less, talking less, smiling never. One morning, I found him sitting in the car in the driveway, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. When I opened the door, he flinched. "I didn't hear you," he said quickly. "You've been out here for an hour," I whispered. He didn't answer, just kept his eyes fixed ahead. "I used to feel like I was someone, Claire," he finally said. "Now I can't even look in the mirror." That broke something in me. Not just because of what he said, but because I knew what it felt like. That quiet erosion of self, the kind that doesn't make noise but leaves you hollow. We started avoiding each other. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. He would leave early and come home late, pretending to still have things to do, while I sat in the empty kitchen trying to hold together a routine that no longer made sense. I'd fold the same towels twice, rearrange the same shelf, cook dinner even when I knew he wouldn't eat. It's strange how you cling to small acts of normalcy when your world is collapsing, as if folding laundry can somehow fix a broken life. The day we lost the house, I watched Eli sign the papers without a word. He didn't look at me, didn't look at the man from the bank, just stared at the table. Afterward, we packed what we could into the car. Clothes, a few books, my grandmother's photo, and a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. Before locking the door one last time, I walked through each room slowly. The echo of our laughter still hung in the corners, the mark on the wall where we measured our height, the dent in the door from the time Eli tripped carrying our groceries. All of it felt alive. I pressed my hand to the wall and whispered, "Thank you," because even broken things deserve gratitude for the moments they held. We moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. It smelled like dust and old paint. The view was a parking lot, but it was ours, or at least it had to be. Eli got a job at a hardware store. I found work baking for a cafe nearby. We pretended it was temporary, like we were just passing through. But the truth was, we were lost. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from two people who love each other, but don't know how to speak anymore. We'd pass each other in the mornings, me heading out with a basket of bread, him with a thermos of coffee, and it was like our love had turned into a polite ghost, haunting the space between us. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and see him sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. And even though I wanted to reach out, to say something, I couldn't, because part of me was angry too. Angry that he'd shut me out. Angry that he'd chosen pride over partnership. Angry that I'd become someone who waited for love instead of sharing it. It's a strange thing how you can still love someone deeply while feeling like a stranger in your own marriage. One night, I finally whispered, "Do you still love me?" He turned slowly, eyes red from lack of sleep. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Claire," he said. "How can I love anyone when I can't stand myself?" The honesty of it broke me, because that's when I understood he wasn't pushing me away because he stopped loving me. He was pushing me away because he didn't believe he deserved love anymore. That was the fall. Not the bankruptcy, not the house. It was the moment two people who once promised forever sat side by side and realized forever wasn't something you had, it was something you had to keep choosing. And for a while, neither of us knew how to choose anymore. We left the city 2 weeks after the foreclosure. Not because we wanted to, but because sometimes you have to leave a place before it finishes breaking you. Eli found an old house by the coast, a weathered little place with salt-stained windows and a porch that leaned slightly, like it was tired but still standing. The rent was cheap, the air smelled like the sea, and for the first time in months, there was quiet. We unpacked what was left of our life into 2 rooms. The walls were thin, the floorboards creaked, and the plumbing sounded like ghosts whispering through pipes. But it was ours, and that meant something. The first morning there, I woke up to the sound of gulls and Eli hammering something outside. He was fixing the porch rail. When I stepped out, still in my robe, he smiled faintly, the first real smile I'd seen in months. "Figured I'd start with something I can fix," he said. That line stayed with me for days. Something I can fix. It wasn't about the porch. It was about him, about us. I started baking again, not because it made money, not yet, but because it made me feel useful. There was something about kneading dough that felt like therapy,
The rhythm, the patience, the transformation. You start with something shapeless, fragile, uncertain, and with time and care, it becomes something warm and alive. Soon neighbors began stopping by. First, it was a woman named May, a widow who lived 2 doors down and brought me lemons from her garden. Then a fisherman named Tom who asked if I could make cinnamon rolls like his wife used to. By the end of the month, I was selling bread out of our front porch. Claire's loaves, handwritten on a little wooden board Eli had carved himself. It wasn't much, but every dollar felt like a piece of dignity we'd earned back. Eli worked odd jobs, fixing fences, repairing roofs, painting houses. He came home smelling of sawdust and salt, and though he tried to hide it, I could see the tiredness behind his eyes, the quiet war he fought with his pride every day. Sometimes I'd see him standing by the window, watching me knead dough or talk to customers. Once I caught him smiling softly, but when I looked up, he quickly turned away. There were still walls between us. Not the kind you can knock down with a hammer, but the kind built from guilt, silence, and fear of saying the wrong thing. One evening after a long day, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky turned gold, then coral, then something between blue and violet. That color you can't name but always feel. I handed him a cup of tea. He took it quietly, staring at the horizon. "You ever think about before?" he asked. "Every day," I said. He nodded. "I keep wondering how I could have let it all slip away." I hesitated. "You didn't let it slip, Eli. It just happened. Life happens." He looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something like relief in his eyes, but it didn't last. He turned away again. There were days I thought we were finding our way back, and days I thought we were falling apart all over again. He'd work late into the night, even when there wasn't work to do. I'd stay up in the kitchen, baking for no reason at all, just to fill the silence. Sometimes we'd pass each other in the hallway and smile politely, like two friendly strangers renting the same space. I'd catch myself watching him, the curve of his shoulders, the small frown that never quite left his face. And I'd remember the man who once danced with me in the kitchen to a Sinatra song, his hands warm around my waist, laughing like the world could never touch us. Where had that gone? Had we buried it under bills and regrets, or had it just changed shape? One night, a storm rolled in from the sea. Thunder shook the windows, wind howled through the gaps in the roof. Eli ran out to secure the porch while I covered the bread baskets. When he came back inside, soaked and breathless, I handed him a towel. "Always the hero," I said, half smiling. Eli laughed quietly, looking down. "Didn't feel much like one lately." "Maybe heroes aren't supposed to," I said. Our eyes met then, just for a second. Something unspoken flickered between us, something like longing or memory, and then it was gone. A week later, we had our first real argument in months. Not a loud one. Those are easier somehow. No, this one was quiet, cold. He'd come home late again, covered in paint. Dinner had gone cold. I tried to ask where he'd been, but he brushed past me, muttering something about extra hours. I followed him down the hall. "Eli, I'm not asking to fight. Just what, Claire? Want me to say I'm fine when I'm not? Want me to smile while you bake bread and pretend we're happy?" The words hit like stones. "I'm trying," I shouted back. "I'm trying to make this a home again. I'm trying to hold on." He looked at me then, really looked, and something broke behind his eyes. He said, "I don't deserve you. You should have left when you still had the chance." Then he walked out into the rain. I stood there, shaking, staring at the door long after it closed. That night I cried, not because of what he said, but because I realized how deeply he believed it.
When he came back hours later, I was still awake, sitting on the porch steps in the cold. He looked at me, drenched, eyes full of regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him. "Eli, I never stayed because I pitied you. I stayed because I loved you. That hasn't changed." He just stood there, motionless, then sat beside me, silent. We didn't talk. We just listened to the sound of the sea breaking against the rocks, both of us too tired to fight anymore. That was the distance, not measured in miles, but in words left unsaid. We were two people standing on opposite sides of the same ocean, both waiting for the tide to turn. But sometimes love is exactly that, waiting. Not for things to go back to what they were, but for your hearts to remember how to reach each other again. There's a strange kind of silence that comes before something breaks. It's heavy, almost sacred, like the world is holding its breath. That's how it felt between Eli and me in those weeks after the rain. He started leaving earlier, coming home later. I didn't ask, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of the answers. He wasn't unfaithful, I knew that in my bones, but something inside him was leaving, step by step, hour by hour. And the worst part, I couldn't blame him. When you've lost everything, money, pride, purpose, you start believing you're the problem that needs to disappear. One morning, I woke up to find his tools gone. The shelf where he kept his old blue duffel bag was empty. He hadn't said a word. On the kitchen table, there was only a note. I still remember every word. "Claire, I need to fix what I broke, and I can't do it here. You deserve peace. I need to find a way to earn the right to stand beside you again. I'll come back when I can be the man you believed in. E." It wasn't a goodbye, but it felt like one. For the first 2 days, I was numb. Then came the anger, and then the silence, that long, aching silence that no sound can fill. I still baked every morning, still opened the shop, still smiled at customers, but behind that smile was something hollow. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart jumped, hoping it was him. It never was. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the porch light flicker. The wind would carry the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and I'd whisper to myself, "He'll come back. He has to." Weeks passed. The bakery kept growing. People started ordering from nearby towns. I hired May's granddaughter to help with deliveries. From the outside, it looked like I was thriving, but inside, I was still holding my breath. One afternoon, a man came into the bakery. A stranger, in a work jacket, dust on his boots. He looked around, smiled, and said, "You must be Claire. I've heard about your bread all the way down the coast." I thanked him, offered him a loaf, and he nodded. Then he hesitated. "You know Eli, don't you?" My heart froze. He went on, "He's been working at the shipyard a few towns over. Good worker, quiet guy. Doesn't say much, but he talks about you sometimes." I swallowed hard. "He does?" "Yeah. Says you're stronger than anyone he's ever known. Said you saved him when he couldn't save himself." The words broke something open in me. Not pain this time, but light. Hope. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood by the window again, watching the horizon glow faintly under the moonlight. And I realized something. All this time, I'd been waiting for him to come back, but maybe it was me who needed to go forward. So the next morning, I packed a small basket, a loaf of bread, his favorite coffee beans, a letter I never thought I'd write. And I drove. The shipyard wasn't hard to find. Rows of rusting boats, the smell of oil and sea. And there he was, on the dock, wiping sweat from his brow, hair longer than I remembered. For a moment, I just watched him. The The curve of his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his hands, the quiet strength in every movement. Then he turned. Our eyes met, and the world stopped. He froze like he wasn't sure I was real. "Claire?" he whispered. I nodded. "I heard you were building ships now," I said, smiling faintly. "You always did like fixing broken things." He laughed softly, that same warm, rough sound I'd missed so much. "Guess I do." We stood there for a long moment. The wind was cold, but my hands were warm. Then I handed him the basket. "I thought you might be hungry," I said. He took it carefully, like it was something precious. Inside, he found the bread, the coffee, and the letter. He looked up, eyes searching mine. "You came all this way?" I nodded. "You said you needed to fix what you broke, but maybe, Eli, maybe it was never just yours to fix." We walked down to the edge of the pier. The water shimmered silver under the late afternoon sun. "I kept thinking," he said quietly, "if I could just make enough money again, build something, do something, maybe I'd be worthy of you." I took a deep breath. "Eli, you were never unworthy. You were just human. And I loved you through all of it, not because you were perfect, but because you kept trying." He looked away, blinking fast. "I hurt you." "Yes," I said softly, "and I hurt you too. We both got lost somewhere between who we were and who we thought we had to be." I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away this time. And in that touch, that small, trembling touch, something inside both of us finally exhaled. He came home with me that evening. We didn't talk much on the drive. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. When we reached the little coastal house, the porch light flickered again, just like it used to. He smiled at it and said, "Guess it was waiting for me." I laughed. It always was. We stood there for a moment longer, hand in hand, the sea whispering just beyond the dunes. And in that simple quiet, I felt it. That deep, steady heartbeat of something that had survived the storm. Sometimes love doesn't roar. It doesn't shout or demand. Sometimes it just endures. It waits. It rebuilds. It forgives. And maybe that's what we were always meant to learn. That strength isn't in never falling apart. It's in finding your way back. Together. The morning after Eli came home, the sea was calm. It hadn't been calm for weeks. The waves had been restless, thrashing, wild. But that day, they softened, like even the ocean had decided to rest. He was still asleep when I woke up. The sunlight fell across his face, catching in the faint lines near his eyes, lines that hadn't been there before. He looked older, but he also looked lighter, like the weight he'd carried for so long had finally begun to lift. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Life didn't become perfect overnight. The bills didn't vanish. The bakery didn't magically become a success story with magazine covers and neon signs. But something in us had changed. A quiet shift, almost invisible, but real. Eli started helping me at the bakery. At first, it was just deliveries and repairs, fixing the oven door that always stuck, repainting the sign that had faded from salt air. But soon, he was helping knead dough beside me. He wasn't good at it, not at first. He'd press too hard, fold too fast, laugh at himself when the flour puffed into his hair. But every morning, he showed up, and that, to me, was everything. One afternoon, May, the widow who had once brought me lemons, stopped by and smiled when she saw us working together. "You two remind me of me and my Tom,"
she said softly. "We used to fight like thunder and make up like spring rain." I laughed, and Eli grinned. He said, "Guess we had our thunder, didn't we?" May winked, "And your rain washed you clean." Those words stayed with me for weeks. Our love had been burned, bruised, almost broken. But in surviving, it had become something gentler, less about saving each other and more about seeing each other. There were still small storms, days when he'd come home quiet and withdrawn, haunted by the shadows of what he'd lost. Nights when I'd wake up afraid that one morning I'd find another note on the table. But we learned to talk, really talk, not with defenses or pride, but with truth. One night, I told him, "Sometimes I still feel like you're waiting to leave." He sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "Sometimes I feel like you're waiting for me to fail." We sat in silence for a moment, both raw, both exposed. Then he reached across the table and said, "How about we stop waiting for what could go wrong and start building what could go right?" It sounds simple, but those words became our compass. Months passed. The bakery grew. People started calling from farther away. A small-town magazine even wrote a piece about Claire's loaves and lessons, as they called it. They said our bread had heart. Maybe it did, because every loaf we made carried a little piece of who we were. Flawed, scarred, but healing. Eli opened a small workshop beside the bakery, fixing furniture, crafting shelves, repairing boats for fishermen. He named it the Second Chance Workshop. I asked him why. He said, "Because that's what you gave me." Sometimes, after closing time, we'd sit outside together with a cup of coffee, listening to the sea. The same porch, the same light, but everything felt new. Once, he asked me, "Do you ever wish we hadn't gone through all that?" I thought about it, really thought. And I said, "No." Because I think we had to break to understand what love really is. He smiled. "And what's that?" "It's not rescue," I said. "It's roots." He nodded quietly. Then I guess we finally grew some. There was one last moment, a small one, but I think it's the one I'll always remember. It was early morning. The air was cool, the waves low. I was kneading dough when Eli came up behind me, slipped his arms around my waist, and whispered, "You know, this is the first time in years I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." I smiled, pressing my flour-covered hands over his. "And where's that?" He rested his chin on my shoulder. "Home." The word settled deep in my heart. Simple, quiet, enough. Looking back now, I realize something. Love isn't about never falling apart. It's about who stays when you do. It's about learning to hold space for someone else's wounds without losing yourself. It's about choosing every day to stay when it would be easier to run. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's about finding your way through the storm, together. I still keep that note he left me, the one that said he had to go fix what he broke. It's tucked in the back of my recipe book, between cinnamon rolls and sourdough, not as a reminder of pain, but of what we survived. Because when the storm passed, what remained wasn't just love. It was faith. It was partnership. It was two people who learned that the truest kind of love doesn't demand perfection. It builds peace. So if you're listening to this tonight, maybe sitting alone or next to someone you're not sure how to reach anymore, I hope you remember this. No matter how far apart you drift, no matter how deep the silence gets, if there's still love, there's still a way back.
It takes time, truth, and two hearts willing to keep trying. But the calm after the storm, it's real, and it's worth every tear it took to get there.